thesis that I wrote on was the relevance of intercommunal relations in a village craft economy. And I took the case study of Kutch. The reason for that was because I am a Kutchi myself, and it was very interesting to go back to my roots in that way and figure out, learn so much more about that place that I had never really, come across. And craft and communities has always been my core interest, and in that sense, that is where my thesis really connected to my core interests. So yeah, Yashi.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yashi Ranjan, and I'm also from 2019 batch. So why I took this course, being a mythology student myself, I'm always interested towards giving voices to the unknown people, giving voices to those who are being suppressed for many years, and holders who we don't know about it. So I took this thesis, and my thesis is about roles and relevance of customary practice in preserving biodiversity, case of Adivasis in Jharkhand. So honestly, when we were discussing, when we are discussing about topic, when we are deciding on the topic of the thesis, I had no idea that I will take this. It doesn't occur to me. But I read few articles, like a few interview of the Adivasi people, and I realized that being a heritage student myself, I had no idea about them. The only thing thing that I know about them is like they're dancing in front of people wearing half-skin clothes. So it occurred to me that if I don't know, there might be a larger population who does not know who Adivasis are. What are their practices that today we call as a living heritage? So it is totally out of my curiosity that I took the subject, where I just went to a land, where to a place that is totally unknown to me, totally different culture from mine, different language, and I'll say it was one of the best experience that I had till now. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. I think your introduction puts forward two important points that I would like you to reflect in today's conversations. This is both about people. So you talked about yourself, where you come from, in a way, your own background. So I would like you to reflect on, when we think of heritage management. I think many people, and even I would think earlier, that heritage is about monuments. It's about something that is from the past. Whereas the way you are starting, you are talking about yourself, and then you are also talking about people, the communities. So I want you to reflect on this aspect of people, both in terms of individual, like yourself or ourselves, and the people who are not ourselves, but they are the other communities. How does heritage connect to these two aspects of people or community? Again, so if you could reflect on that turn by turn. So Yashi would like to go first.
Okay. I think you can start, Bharvi.
Yeah, I think as Professor mentioned that, we have this very rigid idea of heritage being very monument centric, but there is a very, if you think a little more about it, a little in depth about it, monuments are built by the people who have that knowledge to build these monuments, right? I mean, if you talk about, whenever I speak to people, the first thing that they think about heritage is, for example, Taj Mahal. But where did the knowledge to build that monument come from? And that is where the power of the people lies in. And I think that is how heritage is not just the monuments, but it's also the driving force, the people that is the driving force behind creating that tangible aspect of heritage. So I think it's a very fine balance between tangible and intangible. And unfortunately, intangible has been for a very long time quite left behind and not very focused on. So I think one of the reasons why I really felt connected to heritage in that sense was because it was something that was happening in front of me, something that I could connect to, something that I could talk to. It's very difficult to go and just look at a wall, but when you go and talk to people behind the ones who have created that wall, that is where you really find the knowledge coming from. So I think that is where the idea of intangible heritage really lies in the people, the strength of the people and the knowledge of the people that build this heritage. And as a researcher, I think what is what has always been shared with us is that we all come from our very particular background, which is also our individual heritage. So then in that case, we are constantly talking about, what is the shared heritage and what is the individual heritage and where do we place ourselves. And if I think about it from my thesis experience, I think that is something that happened to me because me being a Kutchi, I was in that place that I can relate to. But at the same time, I was so far away in the sense that these people over there, the communities who are living in those villages and who are living those traditions in their daily life, those are lifestyles for them. They are not something very, beautiful, or we think of these traditions as something very exotic because we are so far away from them. But like even simple crafts like bandhani or the embroidery and all, these crafts are their way of life, they are their identity. And for us it may be something very exotic, it may be a piece of luxury, but for them it's a lifestyle. So I think how we look at these communities makes a lot of difference in that sense. What position we give them, what power we give them, and at the same time what position we place ourselves into, even that is very important, because that power dynamics then reflects a lot in the communication that you have, the interviews that you have, and interaction you have with them. So that is where the power of people really comes from.
So when we talk about the monuments, there's also criteria that is natural heritage, and we tend to sometimes forget that. And
Yashi, you have to hold the mic a little closer.
yes, so with the monuments, there's one concept that is natural heritage. And unfortunately, I think people are still considering natural heritage as something tangible, but we sometimes tend to forget that there are people, there is some knowledge that is used behind preserving those natural heritage. And without that it cannot flourish in itself. And I think that's the whole dynamic behind we should not consider heritage only as a monument, but if there's a monument, as Bharvi said, if there's a larger picture, then there's a smaller picture behind everything. You cannot just go and build a building without learning the techniques. You should know the basic techniques. And I really want to emphasize that what Bharvi said about the power dynamics. So what I learned from my experience is that when you're visiting to such places, there are lots of things that might be going in your mind and also the people there. So I'm not sure what they are thinking when they saw me. There might be some rural urban division. There might be some income inequality division. I don't know. So, as a researcher, it becomes so important for us that if we are visiting to such communities, it becomes very important that we should make sure that we are on an equal front. They should not feel that there's any kind of divide, any kind of inequality in between us. I don't know. They might be thinking, they might not be thinking, but I took it as a responsibility that I should not make them feel like that way.
So that gives us a good background about the kind of research you may have done. I think we can now start anticipating that. So just to recap on the responses that you gave, again, the people to be seen in two scales. One is as individual, like you, me, every individual professional or researcher, and then people as others, the part of the society, either part of our society or part of the society that you are going for research. So I think that's the broad context you highlighted, and you already highlighted certain power dynamics or certain perceptions, certain understanding that we may have or other people may have about us. So before we get into some of the challenges of doing field research in relation to heritage management, would you just briefly tell us what was your research all about? Maybe introduce the site as well, and then that will allow us to go to the next phase of the conversation, where we'd like to ask you or understand from you, what are the challenges when you go to a field and do research? So that's the second part, but first in this is research.
So I went to Kutch for my thesis research. I actually interned with this organization called Khamir, which is based in Kukma. It's a craft organization. And over there, so the thing is, when you talk about Kutch, again, there are a lot of preconceived notions, there are a lot of assumptions that Kutch is a desert, it's a white desert. But the reality is that and this is something that even I had for myself, okay? Despite me being a native myself, the only things that I had experienced in Kutch were the sea at Mandvi, because that is closer to my native place, and the white desert, and obviously the crafts of Kutch. But the one of the major experiences that I had over there in Khamir was how diverse the ecosystem of Kutch actually is. I mean, it not only has the desert and the sea, but it also has marshes, it also has mangroves, it also has semi-arid deserts, it also has canyons. There are rivers flowing, there are waterfalls in Kutch, and that's something that you would never really picture, when you talk about Kutch. So, and this was actually introduced to me by the locals over there. So I think it's very important to be in touch with the locals when you're actually going to any site for that matter. And I think the one thing that really worked for me in Kutch was the ability to speak the local language, because that helped a lot in breaking that communication barrier that usually starts off with, and be able to sit down, have a conversation over chai, and just talk to them about what their life is, rather than just jump into your research topic. Just sit down and just have a word with them, just chat. So I think in that sense, and this is something that I've observed not just in Kutch but in a lot of other places as well, that people are very cordial. They're very welcoming, they're very nice. The first thing you enter their house, and the first thing they'll ask is either for water or for chai, and that is something that we've experienced in a lot of places. So I think understanding the geography and the history of the place is very important. You also have to understand, for example, for Kutch, I had always this idea when I actually went in with my craft research. I was thinking of, focusing on one particular craft. I will look at the supply side of it, I'll look at the consumption side of it, and that's how I want to do my research. But I realized on field how extremely complicated that chain is, and that it's not just one craft that is made, and it's not just one community that is making that craft. There are multiple communities that contribute to making one piece of textile. And I think that and the thing was, this was my assumption that I had gone with to the field, and when I realized how complicated the reality is, it was actually a shock for me, and I couldn't really do anything for 2 weeks. I was just trying to figure out how to go about this situation next. And I think my biggest lesson then was that no research is also good research, right? Like no expectations is also a good expectation in that way. And I learned that this shock that I had received, then that is when the idea of this intercommunal relations actually started forming in my head, that we have this idea that one craft is made by one community, and that's how the whole matrix is divided into, but that's not the truth. And how complicated this whole village works into, I think that is where the thesis idea came from. And all of these realizations are possible only when you actually sit down and talk to people. You can't just be on the edge and keep observing, because as long as you observe, you are only seeing one part of the picture. Until and unless you actually go and talk to people, I don't think that is possible. So I think that was the one realization that hit me really hard.
So I went to the Chaibasa district for my research, and I worked with the Asra Foundation. Along with that, I visited many villages like Makasai and Makasai and Chiria villages, and many more. And with those, as Bharvi mentioned, I just want to.
Yashi, would you give us a little background about the places you are talking about, because many of us may
Yes.
not. Yeah.
So Chaibasa belongs to the Jharkhand area that is separated from Bihar and Bengal in 2000. And so if I tell you about Jharkhand, it was basically separated because the Adivasi wanted their own statehood so that they can preserve their culture. But unfortunately, when you go today, it is more modernized, I feel. There's hardly any Adivasi in the Jharkhand region. Yes, you might find in the village areas, but the whole concept of the separate statehood is totally gone today. And then I went from Jharkhand, I went to Chaibasa. The Chaibasa is a district in Jharkhand, and Chaibasa is mostly populated with Ho Adivasis. And attached to that, there are many villages, like this I mentioned few names, and I don't remember half of the names of the villages. They're very nearby. So it mostly I visited the villages that are populated with Ho Adivasis. So this is the whole thing where I did my internship, and I stayed in Chaibasa for the whole 2 months. And when you talked about geographical, that how important it is to understand the geographical thing about about place, it also becomes very important when you're working, especially in a village, to understand the hierarchy of that village structure. There's a sarpanch. For me, there's a
Yes, you muted yourself. Yeah, you're fine now. Go ahead.
sorry. So there's so much hierarchy, and you need to understand the whole power dynamics, how it is being shared. You need to understand the power dynamics between man and woman. How are the younger generations being taken care? How are they being taught about their knowledge? So this whole thing becomes very important. And I think Bharvi was very lucky because she already knew that language. But for me, the scene was totally opposite. Whenever they used to speak, especially during the Gram Sabha meeting, it because I used to feel out of place because they used to speak in their own language and I had no idea what they're speaking. And there it became my responsibility, became my job to understand their language, which was very difficult for 2 months. In 2 months, I cannot understand whole language. It's a very difficult language. So there are a few initiatives that I took, like I used to teach students there, small children. So I used to teach them for 40 minutes, and for 20 minutes, they used to teach me one word in a day. And by that, I tried to pick up. I used to go early, 30 minutes before the school starts, so I can speak to the cleaning department, because in whatever language you speak, they will be speaking the whole language. They doesn't care whatever in language you're replying. So by that, you can understand the expression, their facial reaction, and you can pick up few words. So that's become such a huge responsibility that because you also don't want to feel out of the place. And if you cannot understand that language, the half of the work is like you won't understand what is they are speaking in the meeting, and they might while they will decipher it for you, because they just whatever they say, it's out of emotion and they might not remember. So it is your responsibility, it becomes your responsibility to understand that language.
Okay. I observed kind of a conflicting situation here. One of you going back to your own native place, and in a way, it's about exploring your own heritage in your own place, speaking your own language, easy to connect to people. And on the other hand, Yashi goes into a place which is not your place, you don't understand the language, and you have to do all kinds of different strategies. So for the benefit of our audience, how, because both of you are the classmates and you are going through the similar kind of courses and things, but what you are doing is exactly opposite to each other. I want to hear from you how you were prepared in the 2 years. How did you prepare yourself for even imagining research like this, being part of the same class, but going exactly the opposite way? I wanted to hear from you, and if there is any interesting stories to share, we don't mind hearing that as well. So who would like to start? Yasi?
Yes. So I think we had a subject where we need to make a proposal and we need to submit. So I think at that time where I started, I took a proposal where I'll make a museum, online museum, and about mythology villains. And that was the first time when I went to there's a Ravan temple in Jodhpur, and I talked to those stakeholders. Now, the language was very similar, but the views were very different. Because for me, Ram is God. For them, Ravan is a very gentleman, very nice man. So at that time, I realized that it became very important. You cannot be biased. Whatever you have been taught for so many years regarding your culture, it's time when you go out as a researcher, you need to keep it inside your house. You need to live it inside your house. You cannot go with that mindset. There are many stakeholders. If there are only 5 people who are worshipping the Ravan, but they are the stakeholders and their voices need to be heard. So that's how I realized. And even go with the Adivasi thing, we don't know actually. Even I'm not sure how many people in the audience actually know who are Adivasi and how they live, how they stay, their clothes and everything. So it was very fascinating for me. I totally went there out of my curiosity. And when it comes to the language, so actually Ahmedabad really helped me, because even I can't understand Gujarati. And when my friends are speaking in Gujarati, I try to understand the facial expression, their few words. So I kind of picked that technique from there, and that's how I applied in that field. Bharvi.
Now that Yashi also talks about this, I realize that there has been a pattern for me as well, wherein I keep going back to my roots in some or the other way. So I think starting from Junagadh, the first trip that we went to Junagadh was a little bit of a mix of anthropology and culture, nature, that dynamics. So being a Jain myself, I have been to Junagadh to go to the pilgrimage at Girnar a lot of times, but I never really. So our pilgrimage always consisted of going to that place, climbing the mountain, and coming back, and then exiting the village. But this time when I went to Junagadh, that is when I realized that there is actually a very well-established village with a very rich history behind it, and that is something that I had never really thought about. I mean, there were caves that are not even visible on the Google Maps, and there were maqbaras and hidden tombs that we had never even thought about. And so and the second a project that we did similar to the workshop, the workshop assignment that Yashi was talking about. That was the one that I did in Mumbai, in Kotachiwadi. And Kotachiwadi is a place that I've visited multiple times. But again, when I went back with a particular mindset of trying to, talk to people and listen to people, more importantly, not just talking, but actually listening to people, that is when I realized how different my view of that place and how beautiful that place is vis-a-vis the view of people and how they were actually facing issues in that place, how different those two perspectives were. And I think so these 2 years have been for me a very interesting journey of going back to my roots in some way or the other and rediscovering things that I had never thought about or never saw for myself without this perspective of heritage management, if you put it that way.
If I can add, the Bharvi said that this 2 years she rediscovered her own culture. But for me, this whole 2 years was rediscovering someone else's culture, someone else's perspective, and that has changed. Like my view has changed, my horizon has expanded to understand and to absorb that there are so many different things that we might find. There's few things that we might find uncivilized or profane or wrong, but they exist, they do exist, and people have faith, people have belief in them. So it also not only about believing in your own faith, believing in your own culture, but also respecting the cultures of other. And that's what I believe is more about heritage, and that's how it has helped me a lot to understand the feeling and the emotion of other people.
Excellent. I think very fascinating stories of your own experience and journey. But I'm also thinking that while we talk about me versus them, there is I and there is they. I think somewhere there might be opportunities of finding good on all sides, but also chances that things may not be the way we are thinking, and there might be cases where some ethical issues may arise. And as a researcher, I'm sure you had always kept that in mind. So I want to hear from you, particularly with reference to your own research for thesis. What are some of the ethical concerns that one has to keep in mind when we are doing research in a community context, whether it's your own community or somebody else's community? What are some of the ethical concerns? Maybe Bharvi, you can start.
So when you talk about the difference between I and them, we and them, I think one of the major things to keep in mind is the distance you have not just from your research, but also from the community. I think it's very important to understand how much you want to immerse yourself with them and how much distance you want to keep. Because a lot of times it's so also happened that while we have certain expectations from the community to fulfill our research, there are also times when the communities start having expectations from us. And how, in a way similar to how we have this tendency to romanticize their lifestyle and their way of living and their culture, they also have this larger than life idea or this romanticized idea about us. So, for example, I'll share this one incident that happened. I had gone to this temporary settlement where Rabari stays. It's called a Vas. So I'd gone to Ranara Vas in Kutch. It's a temporary settlement of the Rabaris. And I had gone there to talk to them about the different types of clothing that they wear, the different types of embroideries, and just the different types of clothes that they have. And when we sat down, obviously the natural flow of conversation was starting with introductions. And I told them that I am a researcher, and they asked me, what does a researcher do? So I told them that I'm actually studying, and this is something that I want to know more about. And they asked me, what is going to happen after this? What are you going to do? So I told them that I'm researching this, I'm going to write about this. And their immediate next thought was, oh, are you going to write a book about us? So for them, any kind of research sort of culminates in a very fancy publication or a book, and it's very difficult to make them understand, and I couldn't even try to make them understand that this book is not something in a way that they are imagining, right? And so I realized that how we talk about them, that oh, they live in this way and they go to the forest and they do this and they do that, they have a similar idea about us as well. And from this idea, there are a lot of expectations that they naturally have of us. And so while we were discussing, and while we were going through all these fabrics and textiles and clothings that they were having, one of these ladies came near me and she whispered, do you have any connections in the city? Do you think you can sell some of our clothes? And as a researcher, I not just as a researcher, but just as a person, I did not have those connections, obviously, and I couldn't lie to her. But the way she was saying, the only thing I could think about was, I'll see if I can do anything. Maybe I'll check. I don't know. I'm not sure. So these are some of the kind of expectations that they have from us. And I think after a certain point, it becomes very difficult for us to make sure that there is a distance between us and the community, because as much as we try to make sure that we are not too attached to the research itself, to not be biased about it, we tend to sort of forget that the community that we are so immersed in also can develop a certain type of attachment to us and have certain expectations from us. So I think that was one thing that we had to be really mindful about.
Just Bharvi said that it's very important to understand how much you want to immerse in the field. So I'll like to tell a story. So while I was visiting different villages, so I got her very sad stories because the first wave had just passed. People have migrated back. Some people don't have a proper living. They don't have a house. Watching their living conditions. Some don't have food. So when you hear so much stories, you already feel emotional. As a human, you have that. You feel emotion. You get that sad feeling. And on the same day when I visit the second, like the fourth or third villages, there's a Munda who's the head of that village. And while I was talking, or while the head of the NGO was also talking, we know that he was very corrupt. He had already taken lots of money, and the work has not been done. Infrastructure has not been up to date in that village. So I felt very, there's the emotion, like my sad emotion just converted into anger, because I have seen so much of sadness in previous village, and in second I saw this person who is totally corrupt, who is living a luxury life as compared to the others in that village. So my whole thinking process just changed. Not only while he was giving me the interview, the whole Gram Sabha, while sitting and while the whole Gram Sabha was speaking, I started judging everyone. Even if the leader is corrupt, there might be a possibility that the member of the Gram Sabha is also corrupt. And my whole interview, when I was listening to the interview, I had a very critical aspect. I was listening to I was not very keen to listen to them, and I was just judging the every line that he might be doing something wrong in that. But the second I thought that, is it important for me to think about why he's corrupt or why he's doing like that? Because as a researcher, my topic is different. I just it does not bother me, or should it bother me? So that's the biggest ethical dilemma that I feel at that time.
Thank you. I think those are just the glimpses of some ethical dilemmas that we run into when we do these kind of serious but also sensitive research, particularly based in communities. And I would like to point out here for the benefit of the audience that on the one hand, while Bharvi's research connected to the crafts ecosystem and how to make it relevant to the livelihood and all that, Yashi, you had a different focus. You were looking into how does this indigenous knowledge systems, their practices, their beliefs, and how can that be connected to biodiversity conservation? I think that's where you were coming from, which is very interesting. So I think before I open the floor to any questions from the audience, I want you to reflect on two things. One is, since thesis is your culmination of the 2 years of explorations into multiple things that we had done, what is your reflection when you look back now, whether you felt good about having done that thesis, or have you had a feeling where you felt, oh, maybe I should have learned something else? So just a brief reflection on looking back at the 2 years journey and seeing thesis as your ultimate product. How do you feel about it? And then in that connection, maybe the next question will be, what would you suggest to the newcomers, new thesis doers, to keep in mind from your experience? So you can either do one at a time or address both questions. Yashi, would you like to start?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So this 2 year has been like very enriching experience for me, and in my the ultimate, as I said, is the final product. So when I joined CHM, I had courses like economics, polity, governance, and I thought, what is the need for such courses in heritage? But in the field, I realized that how much important those were, because that courses really helped me. The discourse classes, the economics, the governance, and there I was able to reflect, and there I was able to put some theoretical aspect into practice, and that's why I was able to understand the field scene. Until I would not know the theory part, it will be very difficult for me to understand how the whole governance system work, how the panchayat system work, if sir had not taught us. So I feel very good because I was able to understand what was happening there just because of 2 years thesis in this class, 2 years what I learned in the classroom. The lesson which, yes, so there's a very important lesson that I really want to say to the next batch as a new researcher. So, when you go to in the field or into a culture that is totally different from yours, you have never heard about it, never seen, or never talked with anyone else, you cannot be unbiased. There might be some incidents where bias judgment will take place. For example, I give you one case. So they have a very Ho Adivasi have a very main festival, that is their Maghepar. And the one part of the whole ritual is that the old ladies and the young boys, they step forward and they start abusing their god in a sexual way. So I was taken aback that you're abusing your god. For 26 years, people have taught me that there's a very thin line between sacred and profane. And what was happening there was very uncivilized. I could not understand why it is happening. So if as a researcher for 2 years, I've been taught that you need to be unbiased, you need to not judge. How could I expect anyone else who's reading my thesis or who might tell the story? They might not judge. And I also realized while doing this, I might be supporting someone else's narrative. For example, Britishers have tried so hard to put in that the Adivasis are very uncivilized people and they need to be secluded from the larger population. So unconsciously, I might be supporting that narrative also. So I took it as a responsibility to go to the background story. If they are doing so, there might be some story behind it. And it was not easy because half of the people does not know why they are doing this. It's a continuation process, right? They're doing this. So you might have to put a lot of efforts, but it's very important. If you are going to someone else's culture, don't present things as it is. Learn the background story. And the background story is very simple. I'll tell you if people have doubts. that they just do this because their origin myth is about reproduction, and they ask their god to reproduce more, to have more fertility, more vegetation. That's how the earth will prosper. And people might take, even I took it in the other way. So how can I expect someone else? It's become very important to have a background story check. Don't present as it is. That's the biggest lesson that I learned.
Thank you for that wise advice, Yashi.
Thanks.
I think Yashi has covered the first half of the question very well, so I'll go to the second half. For me, I think the one advice that I would probably give to people who are into research, especially research related to communities, is to be sure of who you are, and at the same time be sure of who the opposite person is. I think a lot of times what happens is that in our head, we have this subconscious power that we try to hold for ourselves, as a researcher, as an expert, as a professional maybe. But and the problem that happens is that this subconscious um, image of ours, a lot of times it sort of translates in a lot of verbal and non-verbal gestures. And it's very easy for the opposite person to pick up these gestures. A lot of times it has happened that if you think of yourself as someone who has this much knowledge and is just going to get extra knowledge from the others, I don't think that is a very good way of approaching communities, because putting yourself in a place where I know this and so they might not know this, I don't think that power dynamics is something that you should go with in the field. And that is why even the terminology that you use for yourself, rather than calling yourself an expert or a professional or a consultant or something like that, that power that you give yourself, that plays a lot in your mind, and that sort of translates in your actions. And so maybe what I would prefer for myself is someone as a collaborator, someone who has an equal footing with the research, with the communities, and that opens a lot of communication channels. It gives you the ability to understand the opposite person and at the same time respect them, and that respect then becomes mutual, which helps a lot in your research ahead. So I think establishing that connection and that level of equal understanding, that is very important. So yeah, that is one thing that I would talk about.
Okay, now I think we will open the floor for questions, and I see some questions in the chat box probably. I will encourage you to unmute and ask. But while I do that, let me just clarify that we started by saying that heritage is not just about monuments. By saying that, we don't mean that monuments are not heritage. Monuments are very well heritage. Architectural heritage is there, urban heritage, built, natural, all kinds of heritage is there. Today's conversation was focusing on communities, working and doing research in communities. That was the context we're talking about. In the past episode, I think we focused on looking at the urban context, and so that was the conversation. So I want just you to keep in mind that today's conversation is just part of the conversation that we're going to have. So with that in mind, if you have questions, please raise your hand. If I can see. Siddharth Gupta, would you like to come on camera or at least unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, hello everyone. My name is Siddharth Gupta. So my main question is that am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So when I was about to do a research project a few years or few months ago, I was asked this thing that I was very driven by passion about that particular subject area. But then my mentors asked me how will you make a difference with this research? So from there onward, I started asking this question to every person out there who's related to heritage and all these things. So how do you justify your research and how does it impact or contribute to that particular community or that subject area? Because being driven by passion and learning them and researching them, it's good. It benefits it makes our thesis very precise and it makes it very unique. We enjoy it rather than taking it as a master's thesis. But at end result, we talk that we can't really publish a book out of the thesis. That's a long process. So how do we just for example, if we do it we do it as a project, So how do we justify that particular research?
So Yashi, do you want to answer?
Yes. So just he said that he wanted to do out of passion.
You have to hold the mic.
Sorry, he want the first dialogue that line you said that you wanted to do out of passion. Even my topic was very out of passion because out of curiosity, more of that. But when I realized that when I talk about Adivasi, I don't know how many people know actually who they are, and we have not known their story because they have been through so much since independence, and then they have this whole horizontal vertical migration, and we talk about the freedom of statehood. So in that whole process, they are now fighting for their livelihoods, but there are few people who really want to preserve and hold their culture, their knowledge, that indigenous knowledge. But unfortunately, they are not able to do that because if a old person, I talked to an old man, he wants his son to know about how they preserve and how the techniques and how they seeds and everything that he was telling me. But his son is more like he want to go out, he want to work in the town and earn money, because while doing this, he might not be able to earn money. So what will be the benefit? What will be the effort? He is giving so much of effort and he might not earn anything from it. That does not make sense to him, and he's right from his point, from his perspective. So I believe that my research, the whole Adivasi, I will not say that it solved all the problem. It's just a 1%. What I'm trying to explain here is that Adivasi do have a very unique knowledge. Their customary practice is something which is very unique. Their management system is something which we should learn from them. And that I really want to introduce in the larger perspective, the larger domain, that rather than seeing them as uncivilized or my people who are just migrating or scheduled caste or scheduled tribes, it's important to understand that they are people who have lots of knowledge, and if it's lost, it's going to be lost forever. So it's important that it's time that we need to work and we need to try to preserve their customary practice.
Yeah, so I believe it's also about bringing them in the limelight, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. I would also like to add that I think over here, along with your passion, I think it's important to also be mindful of your limitations, because as a master's student, you have only so many resources to do justice to your subject, right? I think your passion, then your research can then finally make a difference when you go out of your student of your academics and become a professional in that sense. And that is when you have more resources, and that is when you can channel your passion into doing something that is actually making a difference, right? So I think along with your passion, you also have to understand that you have certain limitations, and as a student, then your role would be to gather that preliminary data that would further help you complete your passion when you do have the resources. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth, for that wonderful question, particularly
Thank
since
you.
I teach the course on ethics, and you really asked a very important question. And but just to add on to what they said, both of them actually went to do this research after doing their practicum in the similar context, with the similar organizations. So I think that grounding is a must before we get into research, because research for the sake of research it has no value. I think we cannot do that. But then, as Bharvi said, there is a limit to how much we can promise. How much we can. I think recognizing one's limit, being humble, is perhaps a good way of starting a research. And I think that's the message came out. The other thing I will add on to that is, by doing a research, if we feel and be comfortable that I've done a good job for them, if you think that you are the savior and all that, I think that's where we mess up. And then that's the core of this ethics course that we do, is to remind them that we are just a humble being and we don't know everything. And I think something that they already highlighted, that how do we perceive ourselves? Are we an expert? Who is the expert? And then eventually, when we talk about heritage management, whose heritage are we talking about? I think they are the questions we discussed, but partly I think they touched upon. I hope, but I'm glad that you raised this question. Thank you. But does that satisfy your question? Do you have to add anything from your perspectives?
No, I think that's fair.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody on the Zoom you may raise your hand, and Tanushree, you might remind me if there is hand raised. Otherwise, any question from the room? Yes, Niyati. I think you should use the mic.
Thank you for such an insightful, talk. My question is to both of you that, you, Bharvi, being someone from the community itself, and Yashi, you being someone totally an outsider from the community. How did you manage you to detach and you to attach with that community for a zoom out and a zoom in view? So, yeah.
I cannot hear the second part. How did you attach? How did you manage to attach? Her question was?
She asked, how did you manage to attach yourself to the community since you were not a part of the community? And for me, how to detach myself since I was a part of the community. So go ahead.
And
Okay.
allow me to add something to that. Hello. If there were some specific research methodologies that helped you towards this attachment and detachment. Okay, this is a difficult question. Both of them are a difficult question, but well, these are the questions from Niyati and myself.
Yes. Hello.
Go ahead, Yashi, you are audible.
Thought I lost you. So for me, honestly, attachment was not easy. Like if I share you first, when I went there, I did not want to stay there. There are so many things that was not very familiar, be it like the living condition or the people. I just wanted to run away from that place. But I realized that I came here and I wanted to learn more. There's something effort. I want to move out of my comfort zone and then work there. So as I said, attachment, it's a very small process that I took. So, just going 1 hour earlier so that I can talk to the cleaning department women. And they used to tell me their life story, and I used to tell them their life story. They used to share me everything, whatever happening in their families and everything. Teaching the students, and after meeting the parents also, what their parents are doing and how they are, everything. And whenever I used to go and visit to these meetings, I used to make sure that rather than sitting on chairs or in the center, the places that were being reserved for the people coming from NGO, I used to find my place with the women of that villages, and I used to talk to them. We started conversation with how many vegetables do I know, and they used to make my fun because I belong to Mumbai. That's why I don't know any vegetables name. And that's how the whole process started, because they become so comfortable with me at one point that they started sharing lots of things. And sometimes I didn't realize, but the talks that we had with those women, those informal talks, really helped me in my thesis. I really quoted them more than my formal structured interviews. So it all started with how much you are ready to open with them, how much initiative you are taking from your own side. And for me, I was lucky that people I met were very nice people. So I did not had this very major issue that I was not able to adjust. It took time, but it just went very smoothly afterwards. And I didn't want to come back. I never wanted to come back from there, but COVID happened, second wave came, and I had to come back.
Yeah, I think the process of detachment for me started when, so this is something that Yashi and I used to discuss a lot of times during the whole journey, is that when I started the thesis research, the preliminary research, I read a lot of papers, as everybody does. They did a dedicated literature review and all of those things. But when I went into field, as I mentioned, it was a shock for me because everything that I had studied and I had read about, none of it was actually happening. The reality was so vastly different from what I had learned about. And I think that was the most humbling experience for me, because that's when I realized that, whatever I have learned is not valid over here. And that is what connected me to the very first lesson that we had in the center about unlearning. How important not just learning, but how important unlearning also is. So I think that was a very important experience for me. The shock of, I might not be able to produce a thesis anymore, to, okay, maybe this is, no knowledge is also good knowledge, and then to going to, what I know might not be the truth. And so there are multiple versions of truth. And what I have to look at is what they think or what they believe, the community believes to be the truth. So that was the process. And as Professor Yanis asked about the methodology, I think not a particular methodology, but one practice that really helped was discussing these developments with my peers. So as I mentioned, I used to talk to Yashi because we both of us were in the field at the same time, and both of us were dealing with these kind of communities. So I think just talking about what we were going through, and it was not all the time just thesis related, just our complaints of how we are living the village life, or what are the facilities that are not available, and just that conversation led to some very critical understandings of the field itself. So I think being able to talk openly with your peers, that was a very important way of detaching, because that was also very critical way of, a way of receiving critical comments about your learnings. So I think that was a process that helped in maintaining my position in the field. Yeah.
Any other questions? That was a difficult one, I think. Yes.
Thank you. So one thing is that, like Bharvi, you started with that, the tangible we carried forward, we took care of, but the intangible we left behind. So I would say that that is not entirely correct, because you see, like we had a long centuries, where the tangibles were destroyed, but the intangible aspect were preserved and carried forward. So one of the example is the Vedic incantation. Okay, so you see, and there are several examples of that. Second is relating to what Yashi said about, there is in the cities you don't see Adivasis. Now I would tell that you see the Adivasis have now developed. So if you look at Yashi, the CM, the Chief Minister of Jharkhand, who is he? Hemant Soren.
Yeah.
So Sivu Soren basically is an Adivasi. So now they have come in the town. Earlier they were in the forest area. So you can see that there is a gradual development happening, and so more and more the people coming out of that forest. So we can not say anymore them as Adivasi. Then I have many things, but I'll just keep myself one thing. Just because Yasi likes keen interest in epics and mythology. Mythological stories. So to tell you one thing, like, why the Ravan is also celebrated. Okay, he is means also worshipped in some place, but why mostly it is the Ram who is worshipped. Okay, so I'll just give you one little bit of my understanding. You see, Ravan was a very great devotee of Shiva. He cut his all heads and offered to Shiva. Ram, we did not see that much devotion, okay, towards any god in comparison to Ravan. Ravan was a very great devotee of Shiva. Ravan was so powerful, like in his entire Lanka, Yam cannot take away anyone's life without Ravan's permission. He was so powerful, whereas Ram was a gentleman. Then prosperity, Ravan had the beautiful, the entire Lanka was of gold. Ram did not have anything. Yeah, Ravan was a very erudite pandit, which means we don't see anywhere mentioned about Rama. But what happened, that means Ram was able to kill the entire the Rakshas clan. Entire Lanka was destroyed. What happened there? You know why? because what lacked Ravan lacked character. You know why? Ravan lacked character, and actually, you see in Indian culture, the importance of character is given so much importance, and that is why when Tulsi wrote Ramcharitamanas, he wrote the name title of that book Ramcharitamanas. It is like Charitra of Rama. So it was the character, which made Ram much more means worshipped than Ram. Yeah, just I have more other things also, but that's okay. Anyone else? One thing is
Thank you, sir, for this story.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's my interpretation actually. I'll tell you. One thing, when you said that no research is a good research, Bharvi, can you little explain to us?
So I think when I was talking about that, as I mentioned that, everything that I had read about was sort of debunked. And at that point of time, all my secondary research that I had done, nothing really matched this field in reality. So for me, it was like I was starting from scratch. I had absolutely no idea what to do, where to go, what, theme to pick up from. So in that sense, when I say that I had absolutely no research to start from, and I think that is what really gave me a clean slate to begin from whatever I wanted. So that opportunity of letting go of all the preconceived notions that I had, all the perceptions, that assumptions that I had, and starting from what was available for me in this field itself, I think that was what I implied when I said that no research is also good research, because it gives you a good chance to start from scratch and to be able to explore as much as you want.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I have one question. So in our course, we have learned a lot of concepts, like we have come across many guidelines, and we have learned about many organizations and everything. So for thesis, so when you select for a topic, there is this whole process. Or what is your both of you? How did you selected a topic? Like, was it you found a topic and then you later you try to analyze it through these different concepts, or was it that whatever you learned so far, that then you selected a topic? Like, what was your method in that way?
So if I get it right, what was the method while selecting the topic, right? That is the question, no? So, so as I mentioned before, I was just reading the interviews of many Adivasis, and from there I just picked up one point, that is their customary practice. And out of that, I just wanted to learn, because before that only we have decided a thesis topic, and my topic was totally different. And I was supposed to work on that topic, but I was not very excited about that topic. I was just like, okay, I just finishing it. There's no passion behind that topic. So from that customary practice, I just started reading articles. I just trying to understand what is customary practice all about. And then I realized that it is totally linked to the heritage. It is the customary practice is talking about the living heritage. It is linking with the indigenous practice. It is linking with the intangible heritage. So for my methodology was that I picked the topic and then I linked all the subjects, all the topics that I had learned in the CHM.
Yeah. So if I talk about my topic, as I think Siddharth mentioned, that a lot of these things are, topics of passion. And I think that is the best area to start from. Instead of looking at all these frameworks and all the conventions and all of these things that you have learned about, I think this is a good opportunity to explore what you want to do. And I think that is where we started even listing down our topics. I think as far as I remember, some of my earlier topics were maybe intellectual property, history in general, And then crafts and communities was what I sort of narrowed down to. But you just sit down and make a mind map of what are the topics, what are the keywords that you are very much interested in, that you would want to explore further, something that you picked up from somewhere and you have this question of, oh, what is going on there? So I think the methods and the frameworks and all will fit into your topic. I think that is what their purpose is, right? To give shape to what your thought is. But I think your thought comes out of just pure passion, pure curiosity more than anything. So just that.
So if there are no other questions, let me contribute to Sruti's question, but also the question that Yanis raised earlier. So the frameworks, policies, these are tools. And I think where they come from, in my understanding, is rather than the framework guiding you to think what could be a good research question or a thesis topic, I think as they started with the passion, one of the methodology that they followed, going back to Yanis' question, is to actually examine the framework. In Yashi's case, customary practice became a theme because that's what the Convention on Biological Diversity also emphasizes on. But I think where she was coming from was, how does it matter in a tribal community in India, somewhere else, right? And how do you do it? Rather than going by the language of the convention, you go by the language that people speak and their practices and see whether it makes sense, right? So I think it's the other way around, that you ask the question and then go back to these frameworks to analyze them. And so coming back to Yanis' question, the methodology, I think, were mixed here. You could see in this kind of topic, largely you would rely on anthropological research, ethnographic research, but also you had the critical analysis of the content of the text. You'd also have a little bit of historical or archival research in both the cases. You also have, again, the content analysis of the secondary research, which in case of Bharvi, she really had a very critical perspective on that. I think that's very important. And then I would also add that I think at the center, one of the key emphasis in all this process is the ethical question for yourself as a researcher, ethical question to the point of the research itself and your methodology. I think these are a few things I wanted to add on to this conversation. I'm sure a lot of this can be continued into the next episode also, because we have a few more episodes on thesis research. So I hope this conversation was helpful, meaningful to you. You could connect to it. And if you think that this kind of process is helpful for us, for our society to think about heritage, our heritage management approaches, I wanted to mention that the Masters in Heritage Management program at Ahmedabad University is open for admissions for this season. So if you know anybody who might be interested, please direct them to our website for their online application going until next month. So with that, I would like to thank the panelists, both our graduates, Bharvi and Yashi, and the participants, both online and offline, and especially for the people who asked wonderful questions. Thank you very much. And we hope to see you in our next episode of the conversation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.